image that emerges from the numbers reconfirms our concerns over a dysfunctional immigration system that tears thousands of families apart and keeps them apart. The numbers are staggering. 5.5 million children living in the U.S. With at least one undocumented parent. 4.5 million of these children are U.S. citizens. 1 in 3 recently deported parents left at least one child in the United States. 5,100 children currently live in foster care as a direct result of deportation. The enforcement programs born out of our broken immigration system are essentially inhumane, unreasonable, and in the long term, unsustainable. It hurts families, it leaves children parentless, and it diverts our resources, and it hurts our economy. I hope the testimonies presented today bring urgency to the minds of my colleagues about the need to address the human face and aspect in the midst of security and enforcement in our immigration policy. I would urge my colleagues and those present to look forward to building a more humane immigration system in this discussion that we're having. One that addresses our needs as a single society, connected by family values, economic needs, and the desire to create a life for ourselves and for those that we love.
Important that we recognize that t-shirts like the one that my son wears, it says, "I just look illegal." Those kinds of things, again, it's funny, but it's not funny. It's important for us to understand that we still have a long way to go for this country to treat everybody as equals, for this country to actually live up to its mantra about people deserve a second chance, that this is a country of compassion, that this is a country where we actually look forward to embracing the immigrant. That is not exactly the environment that we see exude every day in every part of this country, but it's going to be people like us who continue to fight this fight and who continue to make sure that we not only speak to each other, but that we look to our left and look to our right and speak to our neighbors, speak to our friends. We have to be unafraid to speak of this when we go to church or synagogue or wherever it is that we pray. It's important that we be brave enough and bold enough to make sure that even in the face of people that don't agree with us, we need to figure out ways to bring this up to them as well. Not in a combative way, but in a compassionate way. Because I think sooner or later, everybody is going to come to terms with the fact that there's no good that comes of discrimination. Thank you.
I had the opportunity this morning to speak on the floor about immigration. And the person before me on the Republican side spoke about immigration because he had just been down the border, and he asked a Border Patrol agent, said, "If there's one thing I should take back to Washington, what would it be?" And he said, "More border security." So I was up next, and I said, "The guy made a mistake. If there's one thing you ought to bring back to Washington, it's your Bible." And I opened up to Matthew 25, right? Matthew 25, and it says, "This is how we're going to judge you, you know. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. When I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was a stranger, you welcomed me." And who are the strangers among us? The immigrants, especially the families. So anyway, I got to say that today. I was very excited. You see, there's the Guadalupe right there. Very excited.
Keeping families together is really a critical part of any immigration reform package that we pass. It needs to be good for our economy, it needs to be good for our security, it needs to be good for families. We need to make sure that our values as Americans are reflected in our immigration system, as they currently are not. Right now, deportation policies separate families of mixed immigration status, take parents away from their American children. These stories, as well as the important quantitative research that's being presented here, are critical factors in how we talk about immigration reform and how we can make sure that any effort that moves forward adequately addresses these concerns.
We at the Kino Border Initiative, our binational migrant ministry in Nogales, Arizona and Nogales, Sonora, Mexico, witness daily the lived tragedy of family separation through the deported migrants who pass through the KBI's Aid Center for Deported Migrants and through Nazareth House, KBI's shelter for migrant women and children. Since KBI's founding over 4 years ago, we have sat with mothers who cry inconsolably as they speak to their children on the phone. Children who ask their mothers about where they are and when they will be coming home. We have provided food and clothing to deported men who tell us of the unspeakable pain of not being able to see their wives and children because they have no legal recourse to come to the United States and be with them.
Last spring, after giving a talk on my research at a private high school in of all places, Minnesota, I had the opportunity to speak with a student named Cesar, who told me about his experiences as a member of a mixed-status family. Several months earlier, Cesar's stepfather, Rafa, an unauthorized migrant from central Mexico, had been arrested as a result of a random traffic stop for not having a driver's license or proof of insurance. Upon being booked into county jail, it was determined that he was residing in the United States without proper authorization. He was repatriated to Mexico after spending several months in at least 2 different detention facilities. Driven by the need to be reunited with his family in the United States, Rafa paid a coyote, or human smuggler, to help him cross the border through southern Arizona. Cesar last heard from his father when he called from Agua Prieta, Sonora, informing him that he was about to cross the border and that he'd be back with him soon enough. After several days of not hearing from him, Cesar's family received a phone call from the Mexican consulate. The voice on the other end of the line notified the family that Rafa's remains had been recovered from the southern Arizona desert region. Cesar's father was dead. Cesar and his young sister, both U.S. citizens, have struggled tremendously with the death of their father. Cesar is clinically depressed, suffers from a decreased self-image, and even began self-mutilating. He's been absent from school a number of days, was forced to repeat a semester, and is at increased risk for dropping out. His sister also had to repeat the 9th grade. This is one of hundreds of thousands of cases of families being torn apart by immigration enforcement programs. Cesar's father became one of the 181 known migrants to have died in southern Arizona in fiscal year 2011, and one of the more than 2,200 that have died in that region alone since 2000. Several sources note that unauthorized migration flows are down across the border, including southern Arizona. Yet, migrant deaths and the migrant death rate in this area have remained near all-time highs over the last several years.
The United States has made unprecedented investments in border enforcement over the last 20 years. It's clear to me that it now needs to invest in creating a humane, rights-respecting enforcement system as well. It seems to me that accountability is the key. Accountability to families and to border communities which experience these federal enforcement policies most directly. Accountability to human rights standards and the treatment of migrants, and accountability to the public for establishing a standard and real metrics to measure DHS's progress in securing the border. Congress should limit mandatory detention to national security in serious criminal cases. Mandatory detention removes the discretion of immigration officials and judges to make individual decisions on release, custody, and placement and alternative to detention programs. Congress and the Department of Homeland Security should also adopt legally enforceable standards to govern the treatment of civil detainees in ICE and CBP custody. The American Bar Association's civil detention standards could serve as a good model for legislation.
One story we documented in New Mexico is Dorothy's. She's a 24-year-old U.S. citizen who was pulled over in 2009 for a broken windshield. The police officer asked her husband, Antonio, a passenger, for his license, and after Dorothy replied that he didn't have one, the officer demanded to know whether Antonio was here legally. Dorothy had met Antonio in high school. He came to the United States as a child, and at the time of the traffic stop, had lived in New Mexico for almost 20 years. After graduating from high school as a valedictorian, he worked on a dairy farm. He was the family's major breadwinner, with a bright future as a husband and father of 2 U.S. citizen sons, and had never been in trouble with the law. But that didn't matter. The police officer who stopped Dorothy called Border Patrol, and in less than 48 hours, Dorothy's husband was deported to Mexico. Dorothy now receives public benefits to care for her American children. Every day she wonders if she will ever reunite with Antonio, and their children worry about permanent separation from their father. She told us, "I never asked to see his papers before I fell in love with him." Dorothy's story of family separation inspired us to talk with more New Mexican families. The ACLU Regional Center for Border Rights has just released a report, Torn Apart, How U.S. Immigration Policy Fragments New Mexican Families. Our report concludes that aspiring citizens often try hard to secure legal status, but struggle in a complex, confusing, and unforgiving immigration system. Several families talked about alarming practices of government coercion. For example, in one case, ICE officials threatened an individual with solitary confinement if he did not agree to a quote-unquote voluntary return. In others, Border Patrol agents provided limited English proficient individuals with forms only in English and threatened family separation or more time in detention if they refused to sign. I leave you with Sergio's story. Sergio came with his parents to the United States when he was 8 years old. When he was 16, in 2011, Sergio was arrested as a passenger in a vehicle stopped by Border Patrol 70 miles. Yes, 70 miles north of the border. Sergio's father had died when he was 12 years old, and every moment he wasn't in school, he worked to help the family make ends meet. Before he was picked up by Border Patrol that morning, his mother, Esperanza, had sent him out the door with his lunch. The next time she spoke with him, he was more than 1,000 miles away in central Mexico. Sergio's deportation has hit his family hard. 6-year-old U.S. citizen Israel is perhaps the most affected. He used to share a bed with Sergio and now constantly asks his mother when Sergio will be back. Sergio grew up here as a dreamer, with plans to attend college, support his mom and siblings, and fulfill his promise of being an American in every sense, except on paper. Deporting him was the opposite of acting in our nation's best interest.